Okay, listen. Presidents gossiped about you, and I know exactly what you just did. You just kind of half smiled and went, yeah, okay, sure. And you kept scrolling for a second. That's fine. Everybody does that. But I need you to sit with it for a minute before you go anywhere. Because it is not the way you're picturing it. Nobody saying you're famous. Nobody's saying anybody knows your face. What I'm telling you is that your name, your actual name, came up in a room that you don't got clearance to walk into. And it didn't come up as a joke. And here is the thing about rooms like that. And this is why this matters. Names come up in there all day, hundreds of them, and 99% of them get said once and they are gone because there's nothing to say about them. Yours didn't do that. Yours came up and then it came up again 20 minutes later from a different person. And that's the part that's weird. That's the part that shouldn't happen. So, how does that even work? How does somebody like you, regular week, regular problems, not on nobody's list, end up being a thing that people at that level circle back to? That's the whole message. That's what I'm about to walk you through. And by the end of it, you're gonna understand why the title says everybody knows exactly who you are now. Because that's the part that already happened. And you're the only one who didn't get the message. So, the meeting was already over, like official over. Translators had put their pens down. The aides are standing by the door already. Phones out, cars waiting outside. That's in between moment where the real talking happens. And somebody says your name and nobody laughs. I want you to catch that because that's the first strange thing. A name that don't belong in a room like that. That normally gets a little laugh. Somebody makes a face, it moves on. Yours got a pause instead. And in a room like that, a pause is expensive. And here's what I want you to understand about why they were just talking about you. It wasn't because they had you figured out. It was the opposite. Not one person in there could explain you. Everybody had a theory, and honestly, every theory was decent. And none of them lined up with each other. And that's what keeps a name on the table after everybody's supposed to leave. Not agreements. A hole. And your name was sitting right in the middle of a hole nobody in that room could fill. So, the first one to say something didn't call you dangerous. He said something way quieter than that, and it hit harder, honestly. He said this person doesn't want power the way people want power. And he explained it like this. He said, normally you can read somebody in about 10 minutes because you can see what they're reaching for. Everybody's reaching for something. That's how you know where to put them. And with you, he said, there is no reach. And that's what made him lean in. Because if somebody's not reaching for anything, you can't hand them anything. And handing people things is basically the whole job in the world. Then somebody else goes, wait, I heard something completely different about this person. And he, hers wasn't from a briefing. It was a it was from a person. Somebody told her you called the thing early, like months early, before it was in one single report on anybody's desk. And the reason she remembered it is because at the time she thought whoever said it was flat out wrong. And then it happened. And she never forgot the name that was attached to it. That's how names actually travel, by the way. Not by being loud, by being right on a random day when nobody was recording. And then the third book. He didn't have a story. He had a question. He goes, hold on, I already heard this name. And that's where the room got real specific. Because he didn't hear it from anybody sitting at that table. He heard it somewhere else entirely. Different country, people with no connection to anybody in that room. And that's the exact moment the conversation stopped being about you and started being about how far your name had already gone without you. And this is where you come in, because that same week, you were somewhere completely normal, handling something small, probably tired, thinking about a bill or a message you still hadn't answered, and you had no idea any of that was happening. And that's not a coincidence. That's just how it goes. The name always moves before the person does, and the person is always the last one to hear about it. Always. Now, their first guess about you was that you got rich, not money. Nobody in that room cares about money. They've all seen way too much of it to be impressed. Rich, meaning you can get to somebody without going through the seven people you're supposed to go through. And they thought that because of how you never seem to be stuck, something breaks in your life, you don't panic. And a week later, it's just handled and nobody knows you did it. So they figured there is a number you can call. There isn't. You just don't fall apart on schedule. And from the outside, honestly, that looks exactly like access. And that's the pattern with pretty much everything they got wrong about it. They kept reading calm as strategy because in that world, calm is always strategy. Nobody's calm for free. You're calm because you already got the thing in your pocket. That's the assumption. So every single time you didn't reach, they wrote down that you were holding something back, and you weren't holding nothing. You just already lived through the version of your life where reacting fast made everything worse. And you paid for that lesson. They were reading a receipt like it was a plan. Okay, so then they compared notes. And this is the part one of them repeats something you said. Short thing, nothing dramatic. And somebody else looks up and goes, that's exactly what they told us. And the first one goes, wait, they told you that too. And the room changed right there. Because up until that second, everybody thought they were holding their own private little piece of information. And now they're all holding the same one. And the thing that shows up in three separate rooms. That's not a coincidence anymore. That's a pattern. And patterns is what them people actually get paid to notice. So they start building a profile on you out of fragments. That's what advisors do when there is no clean answer. They collect pieces. Something you said one time. A decision you made that made no sense on paper. A room you walked out of that 90% of people would have stayed in. And they lay all that out next to each other. And here's what it got serious. The pieces didn't argue with each other. Every single fragment said the same thing about you. And that's when a folder stopped being something you close. And one of them was convinced somebody's protecting you. That's the easy answer, so that's the one he went with. There's a network. Somebody big, somebody clearing the road in front of you quietly. So they went looking, and they didn't find nothing. No name behind you, no structure, no arrangement, nobody. And that bothered him way more than a name would have. Because a network you can deal with. You can talk to a network. You can't negotiate with nobody. Now the fourth one had been quiet this whole time. And when he finally talks, he flips the entire thing. He goes, "You're all looking at the wrong thing." He said, "The strange part isn't who knows this person. Is that the strange part is who listens when they talk." And nobody had an answer for that because they just spent an hour mapping out your connections, and connections was never the story. The listening was the story. And that's when the question changed. They stopped asking who is this person connected to. They started asking why do so many people keep getting connected to them? And that's a totally different question. That's a way bigger question because the first one you can answer with a chart. Anybody can draw a chart. The second one you can't answer at all unless you actually understand the person. And none of them did. And a question you can't answer that don't stay in the room, that won't follows people home. And they stayed on that listening thing for a while because it don't show up on anything they know how to measure. People listen to money, people listen to position, people listen to fear. All three of those you can count, and all three of those you can buy. And none of them was in play with it. So somebody finally asked the only useful question of the whole night. He asked, "What does this person do when somebody else is talking?" And whoever actually knew you answered it in 4 words. They said they actually listen. And that was the whole file. It just took an hour to get there. And that's why every private conversation with you comes out sounding the same. Not the words. The words is always different because people is different. The temperature. You give the same breath to somebody who can't do a thing for you as you give to somebody who could change your whole life. And that sounds small until you understand something about the table. Not one person sitting there has that. Not one. Everybody adjusts. That's literally the job. So, somebody who doesn't adjust reads like a malfunction at first until you look closer and figure out it is the only version in that room that ain't performing. And they tried to place here. That's what that room does. Everybody who comes up gets placed this side. that side, this camp, interesting. That's the filling system. And every attempt to put you on somebody's board came back wrong. Not because you were hiding. You weren't hiding because you kept holding things that didn't match the side they just put you on. And after enough tries, they had to write down the uncomfortable version. This one doesn't belong to anybody. And that made you the piece that wasn't in the equation. Every plan on that table has an assumption built into it. People move a certain way when you press a certain spot. That's the whole science of it. That's the job. And you don't move that way. You never did. And one piece that doesn't move the way that model says, that forces everything around it to get recalculated. Now, that's not me telling you you are powerful. That's just what an unaccounted piece does to a board. And they kept circling back to how little you say. Because in that world, silence reads as strategy. They can't help it. That's the only way they know how to read it. So they went hunting for what you were holding back, w- what the silence was buying you, what you were negotiating for. And it wasn't buying nothing. You just don't talk when you don't got nothing to add. And that's the simplest thing in the world. And it was the one thing in the folder that none of them could accept. And somebody tested you, not officially. Nothing you'd ever be able to point at and prove. A conversation that came at you from a specific angle, an offer with a certain shape to it. A person who showed up with a little too much interest at a convenient time, and it went nowhere. And they wrote that down too. But not the way you think. Not the not that you turned it down. That you didn't even clock it as something to turn down. And that reads completely different on paper. That reads like a door with no handle on the outside. And somewhere in that folder, there's a line from somebody who knew you before any of this. Somebody who described you a certain way years back. Smaller, easier, not a factor. And that's in there because that's who they ask first. And honestly, that's who always talks fastest. And it aged terribly. Because by the time they got to it, the room already had three other accounts, and none of them matched. And that specific kind of L that never gets announced. Your old description of somebody getting outvoted by their new one in a room you'll never even know existed. And nobody announced nothing. They didn't need to. An aide told another aide in a hallway. A diplomat called back home and mentioned it at the end of the call like an afterthought. Someone who was at the table said your name at a private dinner 2 weeks later, and a journalist heard it and didn't write it down, but didn't forget it neither. And somebody who runs something big heard it from a friend and asked one question about you. That's 6 rooms, and you weren't in a single one of them. And by then, people who never met you are describing you. And here's the wild part, they're close, not the details. Details always come out wrong second. People mess up the facts every time. But the shape is right, steady, hard to rush, doesn't scare easy. And that's what actually travels when a name travels. Not your facts, your shape. And your shape held out through 5 or 6 different mouths. Almost nothing survives that. And somebody in there brought up your bad stretch. Because they always find the bad stretch. That's what the folder's for. And the note next to it wasn't what you'd expect. It didn't say survived. It said didn't rush because they watched 100 people rebuild loud and fast and then fall apart again 18 months later. And you took your time. You fixed the bottom before you put anything on top of it. And in that room, that reads as discipline. And discipline is genuinely the one only thing them people respect. And not everybody in there liked what they were wrong hearing. One guy had already made his mind up about you a while back, filed it, moved on, and now he's gotta sit there while 3 people describe somebody he already wrote off. And he pushed back and he lost. Not because somebody argued him down, but because the note didn't back him up. And that's a rough afternoon for a certain kind of person. Being wrong is fine. Being wrong on the record with witnesses is a whole different thing. And here's what nobody said out loud, but all of them were thinking. Every single one of them got where they are by being handled. Somebody found them early. Somebody moved them. Somebody put them on a track. That's how it works up there. So they were all looking for whoever did that for you. And there is nobody, and that sat wrong with them 4 days after. Because if there is no map behind you, then the map is getting drawn while you walk. And they don't know what to do with a road that doesn't exist yet. And this whole time, you were doing something completely normal. And that detail would break their heads if they knew it. You weren't managing an image, you weren't running a play. You were probably tired that week handling something nobody would ever put in a file. And that's exactly why it worked. Because everything they know how to detect, they detect by how much effort somebody's putting into it. And there was no effort to detect. That's the actual reason the folder stayed open. And here's the part that's actually yours to deal with. Once a name starts moving like that, people start moving toward it. And some of them want to be near it, not do it. You'll spot them by one move. They want access before they want anything real. And you don't gotta cut nobody off over that. Be normal about it. Just don't had nobody to see it. Your read got sharp for a reason. Use it now instead of 6 months from now. And don't go changing how you move because of any of this. That's the real risk. And it's not the people, it's you. The second you start performing the version they described, the thing they were describing is gone. Because the only reason it traveled in the first place is that it wasn't aimed at nobody. So keep not aiming it. That's the whole instruction. That's it. And look, nothing about your week changes tomorrow. Nobody's calling. No door swings open on Thursday. I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that. What changed is slower, and it already started. A name that's been said in enough rooms starts showing up before you do, and you'll feel it as small stuff. A conversation that starts warmer than it should have. Somebody who already made their mind up about you before you opened your mouth, and you'll never trace where it came from. You never do. That's just how it looks from your side. So, the conversation about you already changed. They're not asking who you are anymore. They think they know now. And what whether they got it all the way right or not, one thing already happened, and it don't unhappen. Your name got into rooms you weren't supposed to reach this early. And once a name gets into them rooms, it don't leave the same way it came in.